What happens when a Hollywood camera turns its lens on real events so raw, so indicative, that the people in power scramble to bolt the projection room door? Imagine a studio chief clutching his phone as governors threaten legal action, a producer fielding midnight calls from the FBI, or an Oscar party gone silent when someone whispers, "We just got banned in 5 states." Between the silent 1910s and the seismic early 1970s, the span many historians still hail as Tinseltown's golden era. Dozens of fact-based pictures were throttled, trimmed, or quietly shelved because they punched holes in patriotic myths, exposed corporate greed, or dared to show the human cost of war and prejudice. Today we're prizing open that locked vault to spotlight 13 banned, or heavily suppressed, true story films Hollywood now wishes it had never muzzled. Let's roll the reels they tried to bury. Bonnie and Clyde, 1967. Arthur Penn's bullet-sprayed folk opera clings so tightly to FBI dossiers and yellowed newspaper photos that it feels less like fiction than a true crime confession. Warren Beatty, obsessed with authenticity, chartered a plane to Dallas so he could pore over county courthouse exhibits, Bonnie's Colt Detective Special, Clyde's blood-stained socks, while Faye Dunaway practiced Bonnie's handwriting until she could dash off ransom notes in the Outlaw's looping script. The film's verite edge terrified Southern exhibitors, who branded it an incitement to outlawry and refused bookings across Texas, Louisiana, and Oklahoma. In New Zealand, censors excised every pump-action blast. In Canada, the Ontario Board demanded dialogue trims that implied the poor might rebel. Penn's now famous final ambush, shot at 1,000 frames per second to mirror the coroner's report that found 52 entry wounds between the lovers, shredded the dying production code, and blew open America's rating system. But the real shock lay in the film's politics. Frank Hamer, the Texas Ranger who killed the Barrow Gang, is recast as a vengeful arm of a state that refuses to heal its own depression. Rural audiences recognize their poverty in every dust-clouded cornfield. College kids saw Vietnam and government duplicity. Reviewers first panned the violence, then returned weeks later to declare it revolutionary. Bosley Crowther lost his New York Times column for refusing to budge. By year's end, Bonnie and Clyde had quadrupled its budget, earned 10 Oscar nods, and taught Hollywood that moral ambiguity sells. Every modern anti-hero, from Scorsese's Henry Hill to Todd Phillips's Joker, carries the gunpowder residue of Penn's once forbidden lovers, who proved a movie could be both a ballad and a bomb. Citizen Kane, 1941. When 25-year-old Orson Welles marched into RKO with a script titled American, executives saw only potential libel suits. The screenplay pillaged William Randolph Hearst's memos verbatim, even quoting the magnate's contemptuous pet name for his readers, the Great Unwashed. Hearst struck back with every weapon. His papers banned ads, radio editors sliced Welles's Mercury broadcasts mid-sentence, and gossip columnist Luella Parsons threatened to expose Hollywood scandals if studios offered booking space. RKO's bankers begged Welles to burn the negatives. An RKO trustee allegedly floated an $800,000 cash offer to do exactly that. Welles refused, sneaking the print to independent theaters that programmed midnight slots so union projectionists could claim ignorance. The suppression worked, briefly. Kane earned only $161,000 in its initial run, but clandestine screenings on college campuses evolved into legend. After Hearst's death in 1951, RKO reissued the film. Critics discovered its deep-focus photography and fractured timelines were decades ahead of their time. Ironically, Hearst's campaign elevated Kane to mythic status. The movie became shorthand for artistic freedom bullied by power. Even today, journalism professors screen it, not only for its formal genius, but for its forensic dissection of monopoly media, that it collected a single Oscar for Best Screenplay, while losing picture, director, actor, and editing, remains a cautionary footnote on how influence distorts awards, and how history, eventually, corrects the record. Scarface, 1932. No Hollywood gangster flick had ever dripped with real blood until producer Howard Hughes ordered director Howard Hawks to film the headlines. Screenwriter Ben Hecht mined court transcripts from Al Capone's 1929 trial, lifting whole exchanges when Tony Camonte sputters, "I ain't no choir boy." Capone's stenographer could have sworn it was Tuesday's testimony. The Hayes office recoiled, demanding civic lectures and a new ending where Camonte surrendered meekly. Hughes shot the ending, then locked it in a vault, pressing illegal 35mm copies of the brutally violent cut for speakeasy circuits from Chicago to Havana. Police raids only intensified demand. College fraternities smuggled reels and hat boxes, selling tickets for the price of a bootleg scotch. New York's censor board withheld a license, but Harlem's Lafayette Theater screened it anyway, sparking an early freedom of expression lawsuit that the city quietly settled. Capone, flattered, hosted a private Miami projection. A leaked photograph of the mobster, laughing in the dark, splashed across Variety, cementing the film's legend. When a bowdlerized version finally hit legitimate screens, fans already knew the forbidden cut by heart. Hughes had proved that censorship can be jujitsu. Twist the ban, and the ban becomes the billboard. Scarface didn't just influence future crime sagas, it taught studio heads that controversy generates box office gold, a lesson relearned every time a modern blockbuster courts outrage for free publicity. The Outlaw, 1943. Howard Hughes's obsession with authenticity began in the dusty New Mexico archives, where he unearthed sworn statements by Lincoln County ranchers alleging deputies sold cattle rustlers bulletproof alibis. Screenwriter Jules Furthman wove those testimonies into dialogue while Hughes micromanaged Jane Russell's wardrobe, insisting the neckline mirror a dime novel etching of a dance hall girl who supposedly nursed Billy the Kid. Joseph Breen's production code office exploded, issuing 35 notes ranging from reduce breast prominence to remove insinuation of corrupt sheriffs. Hughes counterpunched by yanking the film, feeding radio gossip with rumors of an outright church ban he secretly fabricated. He then hired planes to skywrite "banned" in Boston, above Santa Monica Pier. The Los Angeles Times ran photos, and demand spiked. Catholic dioceses in Chicago and Philadelphia formed preview juries, delaying release until 1946, but by then the scandal had outpaced the movie. Hidden amid the publicity was a rare Western that, unlike sanitized contemporaries, condemned frontier lawmen as profiteers, a stance validated decades later by academic historians. Hughes's stunt demonstrated censorship's Achilles heel. Moral outrage makes people curious, and curiosity sells more tickets than any newspaper ad. The Devils, 1971. Ken Russell approached Aldous Huxley's The Devils of Loudun with a historian's zeal, sending researchers to comb French diocesan archives for torture inventories and exorcism invoices. He recreated 17th century Loudun's plague pits using forensic sketches, then cast Vanessa Redgrave as Sister Jeanne after discovering a letter where the real nun begged to see Grandier stripped of holiness. Britain's BBFC demanded 36 excisions, a nun's rape of Christ, a priest's charred femur used as a phallic relic, Grandier's roasted tongue. Russell reluctantly trimmed 8 seconds, but the uncut negative was smuggled to Paris for a clandestine festival, showing that ended in a bomb threat. Warner Brothers, horrified, locked the full print for U.S. distribution, quietly instructing editors to keep the key separate from the vault. Yet every frame was sourced from parish ledgers and eyewitness depositions. Nothing was invented. When scholars screened a recovered print in 2011, they confirmed Russell's worst outrages were literal stage directions from trial notebooks. The suppression thus shielded not art but history, and in doing so, underscored the church's own archival guilt. The film now tours universities as proof that primary sources can be more incendiary than any fantasy. All Quiet on the Western Front, 1930. Universal spared no expense to honor Eric Maria Remarque's novel. Production designer Charles D. Hall imported shell-shocked French engineers to map trench systems accurately down to rat holes. Veterans coached extras on how mud smells after high explosive detonations. At the Berlin premiere, Nazi agitators released white mice and shouted, "Judenfilm," until the projector halted. Within a week, the government banned the film for denigrating German valor, and Goebbels crowed that he had smothered defeatism. What Goebbels feared wasn't pacifism alone, but the film's forensic honesty. Close-ups of amputated stumps, artillery concussions that silence dialogue. German theaters hid bootleg reels in beer barrels. Screenings in Cologne, beer halls drew standing room crowds while police looked away. Back in Hollywood, isolationists lobbied to block the movie's export, claiming it undermined American preparedness, but Universal refused. By 1952, West Germany finally approved the uncut version. Veterans wept, recognizing their trench songs in the score's muted bugles. The film's path from banned, defeatist propaganda to UNESCO Memory of the World listing proves that a state can outlaw a reel, but it cannot outlaw the memories of those who lived it. Paths of Glory, 1957. Stanley Kubrick was barely 30 when he persuaded United Artists to bankroll a World War I drama that replaced patriotic trumpets with the shriek of court-martial gavel strikes. He and co-writer Calder Willingham combed French military archives for the 1915 Soane decimation files, discovering verbatim exchanges in which generals condemned their own men for failure to seize an impossible objective. Those transcripts march almost unchanged into the screenplay, which is why French generals erupted when advance summaries reached Paris. The Defense Ministry labeled the picture anti-armée, and the government quietly threatened import tariffs on any distributor that dared touch it. The ban spread. NATO bases received standing orders to keep the reels off their projectors. Neutral Switzerland, fearing diplomatic fallout, refused bookings. In West Germany, the film screened only in small Anglican church halls under the guise of moral instruction. Kirk Douglas, already a marquee name, took the role of Colonel Dax only after demanding proof the events were genuine. Kubrick handed him carbon copies of the court minutes in which terrified privates begged not for mercy, but for a fair accounting. Douglas later called those pages the most chilling documents I've ever read. When the film finally reached French cinemas in 1975, after de Gaulle's death, and amid soul-searching about Algeria and Indochina, critics noted its uncanny relevance. The superiors shift blame downward, the powerless die, and the institution counts the carnage as honor. Today the movie is screened to cadets at Francis Saint-Cyr Academy as a cautionary parable on unethical orders, an almost comic reversal given that the same brass once swore the celluloid would never touch French soil. Kubrick's icy tracking shots through mud-soaked trenches remain some of cinema's most imitated images, but the film's deeper legacy is the precedent that documented military injustice, no matter how old, cannot be permanently quarantined. Bury the evidence, and an artist may resurrect it frame by damning frame. Salt of the Earth, 1954. No Hollywood production before or since was made under such literal fire. Director Herbert Biberman, one of the Hollywood 10, had already served jail time for contempt of Congress when he set out to dramatize the Empire Zinc miners' walkout in New Mexico. Barred from union crews and studio stages, he assembled a skeleton team of blacklisted cinematographers, then handed leading roles to the very men and women still standing on picket lines. The screenplay's dialogue was lifted from National Labor Relations Board testimony, miners arguing for the right to wash lead dust from our skin before we eat, wives demanding a voice at the bargaining table. From day one, vigilantes fired rifle shots over night exteriors, forcing actors to dive behind ore cars. The county sheriff revoked location permits. The INS arrested Mexican actress Rosora Revueltas mid-shoot, bundling her across the border. Trade papers declared the project communist agitation, but the greater threat, as studio chiefs saw it, was authenticity. The film showed Chicano women occupying the picket line when an injunction barred their husbands, a legal strategy as radical as any manifesto. Upon release, the American Legion warned theater owners of boycotts. Only 13 venues nationwide braved the backlash. Yet, 16mm dupes slipped into union halls and church basements, where activists projected the battered reels onto bed sheets. By 1967, Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez were quoting the movie at United Farm Workers rallies. By the Women's Lib era, scholars hailed it as the first U.S. feature to place an interracial working-class wife at the narrative center. Today, the Library of Congress preserves Salt of the Earth as a National Film Registry title, proof that grassroots testimony, once captured on celluloid, can outlast every blacklist and bullet. Its survival reminds Hollywood of a truth it still finds uncomfortable. Sometimes the people living the story are better storytellers than any star on the studio lot. I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, 1932. Robert E. Burns escaped a Georgia chain gang in 1922 with a belly full of quarry dust and a notebook full of details. Guards selling convicts to local farms, sweat boxes hotter than the August sun, hobbling irons that chafed flesh to the bone. A decade later, he sold his memoir to Warner Brothers, vowing to expose the system that had broken men for petty theft. Director Mervyn LeRoy hired Burns as an uncredited consultant. The fugitive coached Paul Muni to shuffle exactly as prisoners did after 14 hours swinging pickaxes. Georgia officials caught wind and sued for libel even before the cameras rolled, warning Leroy that stepping into the state meant arrest. When the film premiered, legislators branded it an insult to Southern justice and banned it within state lines. Sheriffs threatened to seize any print that crossed their borders. National audiences, accustomed to sanitized prison melodramas, recoiled at the sight of convicts chained neck to ankle, fed slop ladled from garbage pails. Editorial pages exploded, demanding congressional inquiries. Georgia doubled down, issuing press releases claiming the movie staged Northern exaggerations. Yet, former inmates wrote letters to newspapers confirming every lash. Within 3 years, the legislature quietly reduced chain gang sentencing. Within 10, the practice all but vanished. The film's final scene, Muni melting into darkness, answering, "I steal," when asked how he survives, became an instant cultural echo, quoted by everyone from Woody Guthrie to Malcolm X. Hollywood censors tried to soften the ending. Leroy refused, arguing that ambiguity mirrored reality. Fugitives live in shadow, and a nation that created them must confront that shadow too. In 2025, prison reform activists still screen the movie to illustrate how a single work of art, grounded in first-hand testimony, can force a state to rewrite its penal code. Let There Be Light, 1946. Commissioned by the U.S. Army Signal Corps, John Huston envisioned a simple training reel on veterans' psychiatric care. What he delivered was a shattering 58-minute portrait of trembling hands, triggered flashbacks, and group therapy tears, filmed with no narration, just the soldiers' own halting voices. Huston shot at Mason General Hospital on Long Island, gaining consent from patients who hoped their struggles might help comrades still overseas. The Army brass expected a tidy demonstration of battle fatigue cured by kindly doctors. Instead, they saw young men sob when fireworks popped outside, or stare catatonic at cardboard trees used for trauma reenactment. Generals feared the footage would shatter recruitment drives and slapped a top-secret stamp on every reel. Even a scheduled Museum of Modern Art preview was raided. The print disappeared into a Fort Monmouth vault. For 35 years, Let There Be Light survived only as rumor, bootleg frames in psychiatric journals. A grainy 16mm copy screened at one 1950s Veterans Conference before the projector was confiscated. Huston, furious, compared the suppression to burning medical textbooks. In 1981, after multiple Freedom of Information petitions, the Army finally relented. Critics hailed the film as a masterpiece. Mental health professionals embraced it as proof that trauma is neither cowardice nor moral failing, but an injury of war. Today, segments play during Veterans Administration training, and modern documentaries on PTSD trace their cinema verite style back to Huston's banned negative. The Army's attempt to protect its image ironically endowed the film with a moral authority no recruitment commercial could match. The truth from soldiers' own mouths, uncensored at last. Confessions of a Nazi Spy, 1939. In 1938, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover handed Warner Brothers a trove of espionage files on the German-American Bund, hoping a thriller might jar an isolationist public awake. Studio head Jack Warner bit, and doubled down, hiring émigré screenwriter Milton Krasner to weave sworn affidavits into a story where Edward G. Robinson's G-Man dismantles a fifth-column cell from Brooklyn to Berlin. Berlin's response was swift. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels threatened to ban all Warner product in Germany. Japan and 18 Latin American governments echoed the embargo. Isolationist senators accused the studio of warmongering, while German-owned theaters in the Midwest canceled bookings under consular pressure. Warner's legal team urged theaters to omit the "based on FBI files" tagline, but that only fueled curiosity. In the few venues that screened it, ushers reported audiences saluting the screen during Robinson's climactic courtroom speech. Actors turned down roles, fearing for relatives still in Europe. Robinson himself received death threats. Yet the film's prescience became undeniable on December 7, 1941, when Pearl Harbor proved that foreign agents could indeed infiltrate America. Broadcasts replayed lines from the script as evidence Hollywood had sounded the alarm while Congress dithered. By war's end, the Office of War Information distributed the picture to liberated territories as a primer on Nazi propaganda tactics. What began as a bold studio gamble ended as a historical artifact, the first major American film to name Hitler a threat, and a case study in how industry, government, and conscience can briefly align against tyranny, despite the censors muttering at the gates. They Won't Forget, 1937. Director Mervyn Leroy read reporter C.P. Coble's dispatches on the 1913 Leo Frank lynching and decided that the South's ugliest open secret needed the glare of an arc lamp. The screenplay lifts entire passages from Atlanta newspaper tirades. A demagogue prosecutor spitting, "We'll teach carpetbaggers their place," a masked mob chanting outside a jail. Filming in California, Leroy dressed extras in genuine Klan robes borrowed from a prop house that had supplied Birth of a Nation 2 decades earlier, an inversion that did not go unnoticed below the Mason-Dixon line. Atlanta's censorship board preemptively banned the picture. Governors in Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana followed, citing fears of racial agitation. Columnist Walter Winchell warned Leroy that Klansmen were rumored to be hunting for copies of the script. Warner Brothers stored negatives in a New Jersey warehouse under armed guard. Yet Northern audiences embraced the film, and debates flared in Chicago, Boston, and New York about media-fueled prejudice. Lana Turner, in her breakout role as the murdered schoolgirl, became a poster icon, but the studio's reissue campaign in 1957 met the same bans across the Deep South, proof that the wounds remained open. Today, scholars screen They Won't Forget alongside contemporaneous newsreels to show how cinema can indict newspaper sensationalism and political opportunism in real time. The title itself became a tragic prophecy. The more censors tried to bury the story, the longer its echo lingered, a spectral reminder that injustice ignored will revisit the body politic like an unquiet ghost. The Miracle, 1950 U.S. release. Originally one half of Roberto Rossellini's 1948 Italian diptyque L'Amore, Il Miracolo follows a naive shepherd woman who, after a drunken traveler's assault, believes she carries the Christ child. Rossellini based the scenario on a 19th-century Italian court case in which a village defended a similar virgin birth against ecclesiastical inquiry. When American distributor Joseph Burston paired the short with other vignettes under the title Ways of Love, New York's Catholic Legion of Decency howled sacrilege and convinced the state to revoke its exhibition license. Burston sued, igniting Joseph Burston Incaver. Wilson, the first Supreme Court showdown, to argue that motion pictures deserve full First Amendment protection. At the 1951 hearings, theologians testified that Rossellini neither mocked faith nor invented the tale. He merely dramatized documented superstition. The court's 1952 decision overturned decades of censorship precedent, declaring that ideas on film are as much entitled to the protection of free speech as the press. Victory, however, was bittersweet. Diocesan theaters still refused bookings, and some states retained blasphemy boards for years. Yet the ruling gutted Hollywood's production code authority. Within a decade, the very office that had choked foreign imports found itself powerless to prevent Psycho's shower or Cleopatra's cleavage. The Miracle remains a seldom projected gem, but its legal shadow looms over every provocative frame released since. Each time a filmmaker pushes doctrinal buttons, they do so under the shield forged by a humble 40-minute tale of delusion, faith, and the perilous space in between. 13 reels, 13 firefights. None fought with bullets, all fought with edits, lawsuits, and backroom threats. Yet every ban eventually cracked, every negative resurfaced, and each film now roars louder because someone once tried to smother it. When you next hear that a new release is too dangerous for audiences, remember these titles. Proof that silencing art only sharpens its teeth. History shows that the harder a truth is pushed underground, the more fiercely it erupts when the lights go down and the projector whirs to life.